welcome to day 11 of our Dozen Days of December. Today we are going to talk about a tool that you will need a lot, and that is a seam ripper. Now, a part of sewing is making mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. We're going to do them, and that's how we learn and how we get better at future projects. And even the most seasoned sewist will need a seam ripper. Now, a seam ripper, what it does is it takes out the stitches that you made. So you sew something, the seam ripper unsews it. What we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about 3 different ways to use this kind of seam ripper today. Now, there are some other seam rippers out there, but this is the one that I feel is probably the safest for kids to use and new sewists, and it's the most common. So that's the kind we're going to go over for today. Let's take a little bit closer look and I'll show you those 3 different methods. So this is what a seam ripper looks like close up. There's 3 parts that we're going to be aware of. The first is the long pointed spot. This is what's going to slip underneath the stitches. The middle is where the blade actually is. So that's the part that's going to cut the thread. And then on this side over here is kind of a rounded, smaller piece. Now on most seam rippers, there'll be a red ball on that part. Mine doesn't have that. It's just kind of a rounded silver color like the rest of my seam ripper. Now, what you're going to do with this method is you're going to start by working on the wrong side out. So I can see where my stitches are. This is right side out, what my finished project would look like. But for this method, you need to be on the inside seeing your stitches. Here we see that these are my back stitches, then all of my regular stitches, and then my back stitches at this end. What I want to do is I want to start by picking out my back stitches. To do that, I'm going to slip the pointy part underneath my stitches. And I'm going to push and cut with the blade. So I'm slipping the long part underneath the stitch. And then I'm cutting it with that blade. I'm going to make sure I do that to all of the stitches there. When you back stitch, you're going to have several stitches. So you want to make sure you get them all out. Then go to the other end and do the same thing. Slip your long part underneath the stitch. I'm turning it sideways so you can see. And then it's going to be pushed and cut with that blade. So onto the pointy part, cut with the blade. Once you have your back stitches out, you will be able to pull your thread open. You're going to be able to pull your fabric open a bit, and the stitches are going to come loose. Now at one point it's going to start tugging and be tight, and you don't want to yank this, you just want to gently pull because you don't want to rip your fabric or make any big holes, because then if this gets ripped, you're not going to be able to sew in that same spot. You'll have a hole, so you'll have to recut or re-sew in a different spot depending on the project. So once it gets tighter as I'm pulling, I'm going to then take that seam ripper and I'm going to do exactly what I did with the outside back stitches. I'm going to slip the long part underneath the stitches and push to cut with the blade. Then once I've done that stitch, I can pull a little bit until it's tight, slip under and cut. And then I'm going to keep doing that all the way down, gently pulling and taking my time going down that seam. And you can see I'm kind of pinching this fabric with my thumb and my ring finger, and then I'm holding this with my middle and pointer finger, just so it's kind of holding it open as I'm using my other hand to cut the seam. And that's the first method to taking out a seam. The next method, what we're going to do is we're going to work from the right side. Now, this is where the rounded part of your seam ripper or that red ball is going to come in handy. What you're going to do is you're going to start by just picking open a few spots of that seam. And if you pull it apart, you will see where those stitches are. So you can put your long pointy part underneath one of those stitches, being very careful you're not getting a hole in your fabric, and popping open one of those threads. And you can do that a few times just to make sure it opens up nicely. If you want, you can start it by doing it the other way, where you're on the outside. And I'll go this way so you can see. And you're opening some of those stitches this way, just like we just saw in the first example. Or you can kind of just pop them open from this way. However you want to get it started. Then once it's kind of opened, what you're going to do is you're going to insert the red ball or that rounded short piece into your fabric. So you don't want the pointy piece in. You want that to be on top. You want the shorter piece to go into your fabric. So I'm putting that shorter piece in. And I'm just going to loop it around that first stitch. So I can see that stitch right there. I'm going to put that round short area underneath that stitch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push. And I'm going to push it all the way along that seam. Now you want to be careful when you're doing this because you don't want to push and jab into your hand. So you got to go really carefully and slow, or maybe get someone else to hold the fabric for you while you're doing this, just so you don't hurt yourself. And that takes out the seam. So again, I put the short one in and then I pushed it along. The last method you can do is, again, you're going to work from the inside where you can see your stitches. And you're going to take your seam ripper and you're going to do the same thing you did with the first one. You're going to pick out your back stitches first. On both sides. And then you're going to insert that pointy piece under every few stitches, so maybe about every 5 stitches. So I'm going to find a stitch, put that pointy area under, and cut it. Go a little bit further, put the pointy part under, cut it, and work my way all along the seam cutting those stitches. So I'm not doing every one because that would take quite a long time, but I'm going every few. Just sticking the pointy part under the stitch and pushing it, cutting it with the blade. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over, and from the back, and now I have a gray here, so it's a little bit harder to see, but I'm going to stick my pointy part in, and I'm just going to kind of twist it and get that piece loose so it's sticking up. So I'm not cutting it, I'm just kind of pulling it up using that pointy part, but I'm not going to actually cut it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull. Sorry, I have my back stitch not quite out there. So if it's not pulling, it might be that your back stitch is still kind of in there a little bit. So I'm going to go back to that part here. So now I have that thread loose, and I'm going to pull it. And what that did is it let loose of all the other stitches and loosened it. Now I'm still a little attached here with my back stitches, so I'm just going to take my seam ripper and get those last few stitches out. So that's 3 different methods you can use to remove your seams. I'll recap them really quick. The first one, we took out the back stitches on either side using the pointy underneath the thread and pushing it to cut with the blade. Then we opened it up and took each thread out, working our way along the seam. The second method, we worked from the right side. We inserted the short end, sometimes with the red ball, into our seam, catching the threads in the middle blade, and we pushed it up and along the seam. The last one, we undid the back stitches, then every few stitches we undid them using the seam ripper, then we flipped it over, loosened one of those bobbin threads, pulled it up and across, and pulled the seam right out. No matter what method you choose, you want to make sure you're being very safe with the seam ripper. It will hurt if you end up jabbing yourself with this. So always be aware of where your hands are. Don't be afraid to get help from somebody holding the fabric if you need it. You can choose any method that works for you. Try them all out, see which one you prefer, and then make sure it's the safest, the one you most enjoy, and then the most effective for your project. Hopefully this was helpful, and it'll make seam ripping a little bit easier for you, because you will seam rip. You will make mistakes, and that is totally okay. I make mistakes, and I use my seam ripper a lot, and so does most sewists. So I'll end today's video looking at some of our ambassadors using their seam rippers, and then join me for our very last day of our Dozen Days of December tomorrow, where I share 2 items that you might want to add to your sewing tools.
We all make mistakes sometimes, so we use our handy dandy seam ripper. But be careful, it's very sharp, and you don't want to rip your fabric or hurt yourself. Easy peasy.